All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Tommy Johnson, and I'm with the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to today's Eaton Peabody's Growth Basics for Business. It's our monthly breakfast seminar series, which provides a forum to gain useful, do-it-yourself workplace solutions and insightful, actionable tips. We've got another great presentation for you today with a topic that resounds with everyone: influencing your audience, how to sell people on your point of view, presented by Ken O'Quinn of Writing with Clarity. This is our largest Growth Basics for Business to date, with over 150 people registered. Now, each month we continue to see larger audiences for this event, and this is a testament to our high quality presenters, the significance of the topics they present, and our members like you. Now, like all Chamber virtual event signature events, today's presentation will be free and recorded and made available for replay on the Chamber's website and YouTube page. To keep up to date on all the Chamber's news and events, please visit our website, portlandregion.com, and check out our events page and sign up for our weekly events newsletter. Now, before we get to today's presentation, I'd like you to ask you all to mute yourself, and if you wish, turn your cameras off. If you have any questions for our presenter, please type them in the chat box below, and I'll relay them to Ken in the remaining 15 minutes or so of the event. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge our presenting sponsor of Growth Basics for Business, Eaton Peabody. For the past 3 years, Eaton Peabody has been the exclusive sponsor of this series, and I'd like to invite Marketing Manager Nate Levesque to say a few words.
Great, thank you, Tommy. As you mentioned, I'm Nate Levesque, the Marketing Manager for Eaton Peabody. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. As he said, it's great to see these crowds growing each time. I'm a huge fan of these events. I've attended every one of them over the last 3 years, and I'm always learning something new. I was a huge fan of Ken's presentation last February, so if you were there as well, I'm sure you walked away with a lot of good information as well. For those of you that do not know Eaton Peabody, we are a full-service Maine-based law firm with more than 50 attorneys serving Maine clients from offices in Augusta, Bangor, Brunswick, Ellsworth, and Portland. So whether you're an established company looking to grow or a small business just looking for guidance, we can help. To learn more about our services, visit eatonpeabody.com or follow us on Facebook to stay up to date with legal updates and future presentations like this. Thank you.
Thanks, Nate, and a big shout out again to Nate and the folks at Eaton Peabody. We do these events live. We have a lot of fun with it, and I can't go one event without mentioning, when we do get a chance to get together again, Nate and his group put out the best breakfast spread you'll find in Portland for a free workshop. So when we do have a chance to go live, don't miss out on those, because Nate puts out a good show. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Ken O'Quinn. He's a communications workshop leader and corporate writing coach who works for companies around the world. He's a former AP writer, and he's also the author of Perfect Phrases for Business Letters and Business Writing for Managers. Through his Writing with Clarity workshops, writing coach Ken O'Quinn has helped thousands of business professionals worldwide to express their ideas and tell their stories in ways that capture attention and keep readers engaged. Please join me in welcoming our presenter, Mr. Ken O'Quinn.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, Andrea and Nate. Indeed, it's great to be back. And certainly appreciate having the large number of attendees this morning. So looking forward to talking about a topic that I became interested in a number of years ago, and it's something that we can all use and something that applies to almost anything that we write and say, and we often overlook it. So influencing your audience is obviously about persuasion, and we're often called on to be persuasive at times where we don't realize that's what we're doing. We think we're just providing information, but in fact, you really want to look at it a little differently. So persuasion has been around for a long time, since the Greeks. That's really where the sort of the foundation of what we know of today as persuasion was first created, because at the time you didn't have lawyers. So if you had a case and you wanted to argue for yourself, or if there was legislation, you had to stand up and you had to do it orally. So it's been around for a long time. Plato and Aristotle and Cicero really were the ones responsible for what even today we know of as persuasion. There was no writing. There was no writing at the time. So it was all oral presenting. So it's been around for a long time. Anybody who was on a debate team in high school or perhaps college, learned how to structure an argument, which is part of persuasion, but there also is a lot in the behavioral sciences around what induces people to be persuaded, and we'll talk about some of that today. So first, let's define persuasion. So anytime you are trying to establish or reinforce change a belief, attitude, it's not always when you're just trying to change somebody's mind. Sometimes you're trying to establish a point of view for the first time or reinforce an existing point of view. Beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors are slightly different, but for the sake of our discussion, that's how you can think about it. Aristotle said there were three ways to try to persuade somebody. One, certainly he said that you have to have strong emotions and you have to have a strong argument. You have to have the ability to tap into emotions, but you're nothing if you don't have credibility. Jerry Spence, a famous defense lawyer in California, also said one time that you can have a terrific argument, you can have a great case to argue, but if you don't have credibility in the eyes of the jury, you might as well be outside talking to the pigeons. So this is what is sometimes called, credibility is sometimes called the pre-persuasion phase or the landscaping phase, because it's something that you can do before you ever actually try to persuade somebody. And that is simply working on trying to build your credibility. So let me come back one. What is credibility? Credibility is a judgment that an audience makes. It's an opinion that an audience has or forms about whether or not you're believable. And when you think about it, of course, there are lots of people that come to mind who are credible. Here are some. Even in the case of Consumer Reports, where's the first place people have gone to for decades to find out information about a product before they went out and bought? Consumer Reports has enormous credibility. It does its own research, doesn't take corporate funding for advertising. So, there are different ways to build credibility, but those are examples of people who are, we certainly would consider to be credible. They are believable. So how can you build your credibility? I'll give you a couple of suggestions. One certainly is to simply be an expert. Read constantly. Your senior leaders, CEOs, and certainly just people in upper levels of management, I use as an example. They're not exclusive, but I use them as an example. They are voracious readers, constantly trying to learn. You also can, as I mentioned here on the slide, you can accept assignments or that are a little out of the ordinary, but they give you a chance to expand your horizons. You can join committees. Another big one is really to build, I could say, instead of being authentic, although they're part of the same thing, it's building trust. So trustworthiness is a huge component of building credibility. And when I talk about, being authentic, being genuine, I'm reminded of when I was doing research for the book Focus on Them. I interviewed the former CEO of Home Depot, Frank Blake, a person who was just, people just had enormous respect for him, loved working for him. He would spend Sunday afternoons often writing like 150, 200 handwritten thank you notes to people who work on the floor of Home Depot stores around the country, thanking them for things that he had learned about them that they had done in the interest of customer service. He was just a very genuine person. Herb Kelleher, the former CEO of Southwest Airlines, they adored Herb Kelleher. He used to go to company parties. He would dance with employees. He would get dressed up in costumes and on special occasions. He would jump behind the counter and sell tickets because that's who he was. He was a real person. And when people think about somebody who's credible, they think about somebody who just comes across as real. So walking the talk is certainly a way to build trust.
Hey, Ken, this is Tommy.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. We're not able to see your slides. So if you're trying to share them, I know you referenced the slide, but we are not able to see them right now.
Okay. All right. Sorry. I thought okay.
No
I thought
problem.
I did this a moment ago with Andrea, but maybe it didn't.
Yep, it looks good now. I can see the Goodwill slide.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
We're good.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay. So if I were to go back just really quickly, so the three elements we've talked about: one, trying to build credibility, be an expert. Do whatever you can to build your expertise. Be trustworthy, and one way is to be genuine, to be authentic. People want to know the real you. And another is by generating goodwill, showing understanding. James McCroskey, a communications expert, established what he called the caring construct, and it consisted of three principles: to show understanding to employees, to be empathetic, and to be a good listener. Goodwill, extending goodwill, can be another way in which you connect with people and build your credibility. You also can improve your likability. People are persuaded to do things for those they like. We've all had experience with this. How many times have you been asked to do a favor for a friend, or a next door neighbor wants you to help move a piece of furniture or something, and you don't really feel like it, or you don't really have the time, but why do you do it? Because you like the person. So people are persuaded to do things for those they like. So you can use genuine compliments. You can be friendly and helpful. One way where this can be helpful, and I think everybody got a handout to go along with this, so which just complements the slides. One of the things that you can do to improve your likability is, let's take a scenario in the workplace. You work with somebody you don't really get along with. One of the things you can do to improve your likability and thereby improve your persuasiveness is to find similarities between the two of you. So it might be that you went to the same college, had the same major, you might like the same social activities, you might have kids the same age. You might go to the same bars, you might like the same sports, whatever it might be. There are lots of ways that you can establish similarities with somebody. And that can be a key. Why? Particularly when you are working with somebody where there might be some tension, similarities affect our perceptions of other people. When you establish similarities with someone you normally don't get along with, the person will begin to view you as a teammate. And it is much more difficult to harbor ill will towards someone viewed as a teammate. And so when you need to persuade them to do something, you're more likely to get better results. Another couple of things that you can do, I mentioned be friendly and helpful and use compliments. You don't need to like somebody to compliment them. People thrive on praise. If somebody does something that contributes to the team, compliment them. Do favors for people. Not only does it, it reinforces the principle of reciprocity, and when you need to persuade that person, you're more likely to get the result that you want. So, examples of what you can do even within the workplace where you're working with somebody where you might not necessarily like each other, but that doesn't mean that you can't work together successfully, and who knows what obstacles you might be able to overcome. Learn as much as you can about your audience. So we have a common problem, even in just everyday email, even if it's something that's not a persuasive message. We often don't think about the audience. There are a number of questions that you should be asking about an audience, even in everyday email, but certainly true in persuasion. A couple things to consider. What are their attitudes and values? In other words, where are they coming from? We are, particularly in the Portland area, we are a community of many different cultures. You can't persuade people to do certain things because that's just not what they did in their culture, or what they do in their culture. That's not what they did in the country from which they came. So you want to be mindful of the attitudes and values of your audience. Are they supportive? Are they could be any number of, probably 4 or 5 things. One is, are they supportive? And the reason this makes a difference is because it's going to affect how you craft the message, what you say, how you open it. Is it a resistant audience? Maybe people just don't care. There's your apathetic group. Then you sometimes have an audience, and the problem really is it's you they don't like. It's not so much what you're proposing. So you want to ask a number of questions about your audience. And I'll come back to that in a minute. I'll withhold that and come back to that in a moment. Are they motivated? So, and let's substitute for the moment engaged or interested, substitute that for the word motivated. You have 2 types of audiences when people pick up your message. You have a motivated and an unmotivated audience. And a motivated group is a group that will look at it carefully. They will process it in the context of their own experience. They will draw on situations, how they've handled this in the past. But you've got a group that's interested and reading it closely. And they will process it differently than an unmotivated group that does not tend to pay attention until they're partway through and there's some wake-up call and they begin to read more carefully. So know as much as you can about your audience, because too often we just jump in and we start writing. Is the audience supportive or neutral? If you have a supportive audience, you can simply reveal your main point, your recommendation, your suggestion, what you want them to do. There's no need to withhold it, no need to delay, simply because they're in your corner already. Then you go on to present the costs, additional details. Let's say if it's that kind of a message, explain the reasons and give the benefits. So that's if you've got a group that is supportive or neutral. If you've got a resistant audience, it's a little different. Now you will notice in the handout that I sent, there's a paragraph there, and I'll just read it aloud in case somebody doesn't happen to have it. I think Andrea sent it out the other day. Nurses and lawyers let me just, okay. So I'll hold that for a second. Nurses, lawyers, and accountants all have to be recertified. And we all agree that's important because they need to keep their skills sharp. Yet, when it comes to writing, people assume that what they learned 20 years ago is enough to get them through their career. Okay, that's just the opening, but the writer has taken particular care to position something early on and to do something early on. Again, nurses, lawyers, and accountants all have to be recertified. We all agree that's important because they need to keep their skills sharp. But why isn't it true of writing? Now, this is a resistant group. So in the context here is a manager who wants people to go to a writing workshop. And they don't think they just think it's a waste of time. Why bother? So what the writer does here is the writer starts off by saying they all have to be recertified, and we agree it's a good idea for them to keep their skills updated. Why isn't it true in writing? So when your audience is resistant, withhold your position initially and open with something that the reader will find acceptable. Why? Because we know from research that people are more likely to be persuaded when you present them with something that is compatible with pre-existing beliefs. And as the manager makes note, we all agree nurses and lawyers have to be recertified, and we think that's important. And people are nodding in agreement, which is where you want them. What you do then is you steer the reader toward your point of view. You move the reader away from thinking this is a waste of time toward your position. Then detail your solution. It draws them in rather than hitting them right away with, I think you all need to go to a writing workshop. If it is something, again, this is a situation where the audience is resistant. And then you can close by just reminding people of the benefits and urging acceptance. So you're trying to use tactics and principles to hold attention. Now, hold attention. So we just talked about how to start with a resistant audience. That's the opening. And there are a couple different ways to open. In a longer session, we could talk about it in more depth. But the key here is, once you have their attention, then what? You need to hold people. You need to keep people on the page. Or if you are giving a speech, you need to keep them in their seats and keep them paying attention. So what do you do after the opening? So let's talk about some tactics. A huge one is simply consistency. People like to be consistent in their actions for a few reasons. One, we want to live up to our obligations. Good example, just trying to think of it for a minute. Good example. A restaurant in Chicago was having trouble getting people to show up when they made reservations. So people would call and make a reservation and then not show up, and the restaurant was left with empty seats. So a team of psychologists went in and suggested that they change what they were saying. So the person at the restaurant would answer the phone, take the reservation, and say, please call if you can't make it. Please call if you can't make it. And of course, people would say, yeah, sure, and hang up, and they weren't calling. The psychologist got the restaurant to make a slight change, 2 words, that's all, just 2 words, made dramatic difference. And the 2 words were simply, would you? Would you please call. Why? Because the answer to that question, yes, is a commitment. 37% rise in the number of people who were calling. Why? Because people want to be consistent with what they've made a commitment to. And we also want behaviors to match our beliefs. So, and that can be a belief about our self-image. And so another example is of this one here is we go shopping and we really want something, whatever it might be, and we go in and we spend money on it. And then we're delighted, we're all excited because we've wanted this for a long time, and we spend the money and we get outside and we're having second thoughts. We're squirming. We're not really comfortable when we're looking at it and we think about how much money we spent. Why? Because our self-image is that we are smart with money, that we make good judgments, and we're second guessing what we just did. Spent considerable amount of money on something, and there might be other things that we need to spend the money on. And so you can use consistency frequently in persuasive messages based on one of these principles. We want our behaviors to match our beliefs, and our beliefs are not just our convictions, but our beliefs are also about our self-image. We also want our actions to match our past behaviors. When people want to fundraise, where's the first place they go? To people who gave last time. And there are, many, many, many examples where, yes, indeed, the people will donate again if it's a worthy cause. So keep in mind how people acted in the past. If you asked somebody to help you out with something in the past, you could say to them, it was really great when you helped me. I appreciate your helping me last week. I've got a similar situation here. Could you give me a hand? And most likely they're going to say yes. One other thing, let me explain why, when you get outside, I wanted to explain why consistency is so important. So in the scenario where you get outside the store and you're having second thoughts about how you just spent that money, you are experiencing what in social psychology is called cognitive dissonance, which you don't need to remember that term, but it is simply mental conflict. It is disharmony. It is conflict between what you did and what you are realizing you probably should have done. And so that lack of harmony makes us squirm and it makes us uncomfortable. Consistency is an admired character trait. People who are consistent are considered reliable, organized, thoughtful. People who are inconsistent are viewed in the opposite way: unreliable, disorganized, inconsiderate. Inconsistency is not an admired character trait. Okay. Another thing you can do is simply to reduce the size of your request. Don't ask for so much. So this can go back to when we were talking about, your audience. Okay, when you think about your audience, are they going to be receptive? And if not, maybe you want to rethink how much you ask for. So, give you an example. If you are the CEO of General Motors and you have a proposal to send some of the work offshore, and your audience is the United Auto Workers, you probably better rethink your presentation. Maybe, and this is what I mean by reduce the size of your request, maybe the only thing you ought to ask for at this point is just to get them to think about it. Don't ask for anything more than just think about it, because that's all you can realistically expect. Too often we have situations where people ask for the whole thing. Let's say you want, you might be, well, whether you're a manager or not, you want a training program for your team, and it's expensive. It's a great program, and you know your team will benefit, but it has a price tag, and we're kind of coming up on budget time. How could you maybe get approval without having to ask for the whole program? Try to ask for a pilot version. Can we just try this as a pilot program? Shorter period of time, less money. Now, what that does is it decreases the obligation on the part of the senior managers or budget committee or whoever you're presenting it to. And then there's the consistency piece later on. What you do is, if you get approval for the pilot program, do the pilot and then come back later and ask for the full amount. Now, why are you more likely to get it? Because of the consistency principle that I just talked about. They said yes to the pilot program. You have significantly increased the likelihood that they will say yes to the full program because it was successful and you had your foot in the door, which is, I use the term a lot because that is called the foot in the door technique. Start with something small and then build on it. Using concrete language. In other words, don't use buzzwords. And I mentioned in the handout, examples: bandwidth, robust solutions, organic growth, corporate DNA, leverage, and whatever. We know they're all over the place, and we know, because we've heard it and read it so many times, don't use buzzwords. Here's why it's an issue in persuasion. The words don't have any meaning. They don't resonate with an audience. You could substitute something else for any one of these. We leverage everything. We leverage money. We leverage people. We leverage, opportunities. And I've sometimes said, I'm waiting to hear somebody say they're not going to get married. They're just going to leverage a spouse. You can substitute the word use 99% of the time. That's all you need. Bandwidth. If you say to somebody, talk about bandwidth, and it could be, we don't have the bandwidth to do it. You don't have the money, the people, the resources, the equipment, the facilities. What does it mean? Think about great speakers in the context of persuasion. Great speakers keep audiences riveted because they speak in the language of everyday conversation. They use words that resonate with people. Think about John F. Kennedy's famous speech in which he said, "Think not what your country can do for you." Do you think people would still be talking about that speech if he had ended it with, "Think what you can do to enhance optimal cross-functional leveraging"? Probably not. Because words like that just don't hit people in the right place. So use language that people, can relate to. Language is so important in a persuasive message. Great example in terms of persuasion. If you read any of shareholder letters, Warren Buffett shareholder letters have a global reputation for being so clear and he is persuasive in explaining why he made certain decisions. Is some of it technical? Of course, because he's got people with millions of dollars in his company. But it's terrific reading, and you can download any of them if you just Google Warren Buffett shareholder letters, you'll find them. Okay, imagine the outcome. People can visualize a potential result. And so get people to imagine an outcome. I'll give you an example, and this was in the handout also. There was an experiment done in which psychologists went to Taco Bell. A psychologist at Johns Hopkins went to a Taco Bell, and they put up signs on the wall about what people were going to do. So their goal was they were trying to reach young adults, so really kids in sort of the 12 to 16 age group. It was health related, and they wanted to tell people this is how hard you're going to have to work. This is how much exercise you're going to need if you buy one of those Slurpees or whatever. It was particularly around sugared drinks. And they wanted to see whether or not it made a difference. So by putting a sign up on the wall, and what they told the people, and this was true, that they would need to run like 2 miles or in order to work off whatever the size drink was. And then they watched and saw what the kids actually ordered when they went up to the counter, and a dramatic difference in the result, simply because people can imagine the outcome. So oftentimes, if you want somebody to just get on a committee or embrace a policy, look ahead, because that can make a big difference if you present it in terms of the positive outcome. And it also works if there's something negative. So people will make decisions, will be persuaded not to do something if there is clearly a potentially bleak end point on the other side. So keep that in mind also. Frame the request as a future obligation. And so this falls into the work. Nira Lieberman, who is a psychologist at the University of Tel Aviv, did some great work studying how people, whether people are persuaded to do things if it's put off into the future. And she found that we think differently about things in the future than we do. We think short term and we think long term. Short term is within a day or two, maybe a week. Long term is a month, maybe 2 or 3 months. And so, the farther removed we are from an event, the more abstractly we think about it. We're focused more specifically on details of something that we need to do today or tomorrow or this week, not so much in it. So how can that be persuasive? If you want somebody to do something like be on a committee or help you with a project, my suggestion is ask them maybe like 6 weeks in advance. You're more likely to get an answer such as, oh yeah, sure, I'd be happy to help you. Just let me know when the time gets closer. Now, when the time gets closer, you go back to them and say, I appreciate your offering to help me here, and it's coming up next week, so here's what we hope to do. Now, the person might have second thoughts at that point, but consistency kicks in. They made a commitment to you to do it, so you're more likely to get the positive response that you want. You can always use the bandwagon effect, also called the principle of social validation. We make decisions frequently based on what others are doing. If you get off the train in a city you've never been to and you don't know where to go, what do? You follow everybody else. Prior to the pandemic, I spent a lot of my life in airports, and I we found it interesting to sit there as people are kind of waiting in the waiting area, and we get closer to boarding time. Nobody moves until what? Until one person moves, and then watch all the others get up and get in line. So you can use the bandwagon effect a lot. If you have, if you're in an HR department and you're trying to get people to sign up for a new, fitness program or whatever it might be, mention how many people have already signed up, mention specific names of people who have signed up. That can be helpful in your persuasive effort. Gratitude is huge. So when we think about, saying thank you to people, we think it's just maybe not that big a deal, but in fact it is. When you express gratitude, people often are reluctant to do something because they're not sure whether it's going to be appreciated. And so when you actually say thanks to somebody, and this is particularly true, I emphasize this a lot when I do a workshop for managers in dealing with employees, to say thanks, because it reduces the uncertainty in that person's mind as to whether or not what they did was really appreciated. It also helps that person feel more socially valued, and we know from social psychology research, Adam Grant has done a lot of work in this area, that the person is more likely to do something for someone else. Not only are they more likely to do a favor for you again, but they're more likely to do something for someone else. Again, all because you expressed gratitude. So, a couple others. In a persuasive message, it's about substance, specifics. Anybody who happens to be in PR, a major reason that any pitch to the media fails is because there's virtually no substance in it. So facts and data, quotes, testimonials are great when you're writing a persuasive message just within your workplace. The testimonials, if you know of anyone who supports this, particularly people that your reader knows, use them. If somebody has already expressed a favorable opinion of your proposal, your idea, I would make a point of including that, particularly if it's somebody that your reader knows. So substantive information, evidence, jury trials. Why are they successful? It's because of the evidence. So make sure you have some substance in your persuasive message, and citing credible sources, particularly people that your audience knows and admires. You're more likely to get a positive response. Okay, so I will, I'm happy to take some questions if people have some, and then you'll also have the opportunity to send in some others. But Tommy, if you want to screen some, or let me know.
Sure. So Ken, there's a lot of chatter about the handout that you were going through, because there's a lot of bullets in there that you went through as part of the presentation. I think people are mostly curious about whether or not they're going to have access to the handout. So Andrea has shared that with everybody in the chat. So if you're looking for that as a reference, anybody who's listening, you can do so. Also, that handout will be available in the post-event email that we'll send out today or tomorrow. But no questions as yet, Ken. But okay. I had a question for you in terms of some of these, best practices or tips. Which of the ones do you find yourself using more often in your everyday life, whether it be at the market, trying to get the right cut of meat or the right piece of produce from the butcher or from the grocer, or in your professional life? Are there some that you find particularly useful for you, and maybe why do you find them so useful?
There are. One is in a, I'm careful about how I open a lot of messages. So I do try to, depending on the nature of the message, open with something um, that is consistent with like what we agree on. So it might be just your general societal agreement. We most of us agree on X, and as long as I'm on safe ground, that I'm not being presumptuous, that one can be helpful because it's neutral, and it does it does reach somebody in an area where they are where they are in agreement. And if I can visualize them nodding in agreement, then I'm on safe ground. I use substance is a big one. I mean, evidence is just using specifics because it just saves you from a lot of a lot of times people might try to poke holes in your idea. So the more you can avert that in when you're writing. Consistency, I certainly draw on that. Sometimes asking people, if they want to do a workshop, I'll talk about the success of the first one. Those are three that come to mind. But if in the next minute or so, if I think of some others, I'll say I'll come back to you.
Sure. And I also wanted to point out that the handout that Ken was referencing was actually sent to everybody in yesterday's email. That was a reminder about today's event. So if you want to reference it just in the conclusion of today's event, as we're going through some of the Q&A, you should have that. But again, we will send this out again tomorrow as part of the post-event email wrap-up. I had one other question, Ken, with regards to strengthening and maintaining credibility. Being an expert, and one of the things you said was be a voracious reader, try to get involved in projects or assignments that are going to help deepen that knowledge. For someone who may have done all that, but maybe they still don't feel like they have the confidence or the expertise on a matter. Any tricks or tips you might give somebody who, let's say that they're earlier in their career and they just don't feel like they're a subject matter expert yet? How can you, what sort of confidence or what sort of advice would you give people in terms of being an expert?
Well, one would be particularly if somebody is earlier in their career, I would say to try to find people within, let's say, your workplace or within the business community, people that you might meet at chamber events, which are fabulous places to network. And I would draw on that for two reasons. One is because it will strengthen your just your knowledge base, but it also will strengthen your credibility because it shows you care. So your credibility in the eyes of the person you're asking. And I have had people comment to me, even now after years of doing this. I love to do research. I have, ever since I was in journalism, and I can be like a dog with a bone when I'm in search of information, and people appreciate that. They appreciate the fact that you have respect for their area of expertise. So I would tap into people because they will give you the information you need. You will make a good impression, which builds your credibility. And it also can help you when you're trying to write a persuasive message to that. If you're trying to write a persuasive message to that person, later on. Because you can refer back to, that they helped you, that you were doing this research and interested in learning this, whatever, 3 weeks ago or something, and you wanted to follow up and or maybe you're asking them to do something, but I think that can certainly be helpful.
Ken, we've got just a little over 5 minutes left. I want to get to a couple questions that are coming through now here. A couple of open-ended questions that may require a little more thought, so we'll include those in the email we send out tomorrow. But a couple of closed-ended questions. The first one is, would you recommend joining Toastmasters?
Yes. And that can be, might be a slightly different issue from pure persuasion, although certainly in the interest of credibility, by all means, no question. I mean, if you're talking about knowledge, credibility, your credibility can increase significantly as a public speaker by going to Toastmasters. Yeah, it's a great organization. Some chapters are more active than others, but Toastmasters is a great organization, and it's all about refining your public speaking skills. Yes, definitely.
Excellent, thank you. And this one, I think one of our attendees answered it for another attendee who asked it, but you mentioned earlier about Aristotle, and there were 3 things in practice. I believe it was ethos, pathos, and logos. That's credibility, emotion, and logic. Is that correct?
Ethos, pathos, and logos.
Yes.
Yeah, and you're right. So part of it is logic. Ethos is credibility. So you had it. Yeah.
Excellent, and we'll include that on the email as well. We've got time for just a couple questions, and these are a little bit more open-ended. Are there particular phases or ways of speaking that can help credibility, or contrarily hurt credibility?
Ways of speaking that can hurt credibility. Sure. I mean, I think one is that you're going to have a difficult time persuading an audience when the audience doesn't feel like you're connected to them at all. And when people speak, sometimes you will be at events, I mean, I hope not, but most of us have heard speakers who just ramble, and they're seem to be all over the place, but they're not focused. And so that's a real writing skill, is to find your focus, which I talk about in a writing workshop. And what that means is, when you find your focus, then it limits anything. Once you find your focus, in other words, what is the essence of my speech or my presentation? You have to be really careful about anything that is marginally related, because the guideline is, typically in journalism, it's always been, nothing unrelated to the focus gets in there, because once you do, then you start going off in different directions. So in terms of being persuasive, you have to keep the audience in mind. I mean, you can't get caught up in your own stuff, so to speak, and be rambling.
Perfect. And I guess with that, I'll say thank you once again to Ken. We do have a few other questions that unfortunately we're not going to be able to get to, but Ken did volunteer to answer some of these offline tonight, and we'll get those answers posted.
Oops, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I put up my the end slide. Anybody's welcome to send me a note if they want. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to answer. If you have a question a week from now, send me a note.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Ken. These are some great tips and ideas that I'm certainly going to use in the near future. If you wish to reach out to Ken, please do so. His contact information is available. And if you wish to rewatch the presentation or review the slide presentation, you will receive that post-event email with links to the video, copy of the slide deck, the handout, and some of the questions that were posed that we didn't get a chance to answer. There will be some other resources supporting the topic as well. But if you have any other questions, you can always send them to the chamber@portlandregion.com. Just a quick plug for some of our upcoming chamber events. Currently ongoing is our racial and social equity series called Momentum. This is a self-guided exercise to continue the conversation of advancing racial equity through books, articles, podcasts, videos, and more. To kick off March on the 3rd at 6 p.m., we will have an event called It's a Family Affair, a personal conversation about Black history in Maine. And on Wednesday, March 10th at 8 a.m., our monthly breakfast series, Eggs and Issues, will resume with Senator Susan Collins. For all of our events, please visit portlandregion.com. Thank you again for attending today and have a wonderful rest of your day.